I want to preface this video by saying, if you're really concerned I'll take away your enjoyment from the show, click off right now. To address some comments I got last time, if you think I'm treating people like they're wrong for enjoying the show, you're the one that's incorrect. The point of this video is to provide genuine criticism against the show for its wrongdoings, but it does not mean I think less of anybody for enjoying it, but rather I'm against the idea that this show is a positive addition to the franchise that is respectful to the series as a whole and that it's a genuinely well-written piece of media. I do not want to hear that the show is fun so thus I can't criticize it in any way. That's what you're going to put down, don't even bother commenting because I will just ignore it. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but it doesn't mean it's a get out of jail free card for criticism. I go more in depth on this before in another video, so link in the description for the curious. But I felt this was needed to be said first so some pushback on this video can already be addressed. So I decided to come back at one more round for the show. The first video, well, it wasn't received very well, but I have decided that won't stop me from voicing myself on the show because I have a lot to say about it, as you can probably tell from the link. As opposed to breaking down the show episode by episode, I decided to make a new approach this time. Sorry if you were looking forward to seeing more videos like that one, but I'm just not in the mood to do it since that takes a lot of time that I unfortunately don't have. But I still have an investment in that subject to continue it in some shape or form. Now it's been several months since then, and now the honeymoon phase of the show has seemingly mostly passed, and I think now is a more appropriate time to come back. Especially since the news that just came out that Season 2 is starting filming, so now that we're in the in-between time, there's no other better place to start than now. Out of all my criticisms against the show that I had, my main one in particular was the lore surrounding the show. Ever since it was first announced that it was canon to the games, meaning it's directly tied to them in the same continuity, I had several concerns. This is important to address now because it's one of the biggest pieces of contention that's in the circulation of the show. Which brings me to one of the main arguments I've seen on whether or not this show being canon to the games is a good thing. The main one I've encountered is what I call the Halo show argument. Basically, people claim that the showrunners made the show non-canon so that way they can just ignore the lore and make it thus so that way it didn't feel like Halo.
This is my perspective as a Halo fan. If retcons and lore consistency are the biggest complaints people have, that's a good problem to have. The producers of the Halo show created an entirely new timeline just to fuck it up and intentionally ignore the lore of Halo. That's how far they wanted to go in the not Halo direction. So often we see adaptions that look and feel nothing like the source material. What I'm trying to say is that I'm bitter. I'm bitter that you guys have a great show.
Less meaningful to me watching the series, to know it was completely divorced from the reality of the games. So they wrote the story as if it existed within the universe that the games are in. I love that, instead of trying to create its own universe. Like, what the I will never get over how they butchered Halo. I will never forgive them.
While I do respect these people as content creators, I find this to be a very weak argument that comes across more as deflection or simply tried to use it as an excuse for Amazon's fallout for breaking lore. Just because the Halo show wasn't made with the intention of connecting to the games, that doesn't mean that they couldn't have made it into a respectable adaptation or made it feel like Halo. Nor making it canon would just automatically fix all the flaws that the show has. The Halo show in and of itself is just awful in almost every sense of the word. The overall writing is garbage, the production value, especially the CGI, is crap, it's poorly paced, amongst several other issues. Trying to make the show canon would be awful because it's the only saving grace is that it's not directly ruining the games. While the iteration of Chief is as insulting as all get out, at least it's not the Chief we all know and love that's being ruined. The issue at its core is a lack of competence. The show was also, I believe, produced by many of the same people who made the Paramount Plus Star Trek shows, which have been reviled by fans as well, especially Picard, which I know is canon to the Next Generation and the original movies. Now, Pablo Schreiber said in interviews that they had to make Master Chief take the mask off, or otherwise he wouldn't be able to communicate emotion with his face hidden.
Take in terms of storytelling, if you're gonna try to hold an audience's attention over the course of a long-form series, you really have to be able to have a connection with the character that you're following, the protagonist. You have to be able to have access to his face so you can know how he's feeling about things and what his emotional life is like over the course of time. That's how we empathize and connect with our characters. So it just felt like the obvious choice to make for the medium that it was being told in.
Which is kind of an admission of guilt that he's not a talented enough actor to be able to show emotion through body expression, which has been successfully done in the past, as well as a general misunderstanding of Halo as a whole. If they were to attempt to make it canon, they would have inevitably screwed it up and make it just that much worse. It's exactly how I feel about stuff such as the Star Wars sequel trilogy or just Disney Star Wars in general. Even if those weren't canon to what was done before the requisition, that still wouldn't change how bad many of the products were by Disney, as well as just how generally disrespectful they are to their brand. At least making them non-canon will alleviate some of the frustration we have, such as how we know that Luke will try to kill his nephew, and he and his father essentially just die for nothing. Same thing applies to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which does the same thing to Batman in the Arkham series, to where it retcons a much superior story out of the universe's canon, making it completely understandable why everyone who isn't Jay's reviews.
The point is actually, who cares? Fuck canon.
And ever. And ever.
You should be ashamed! Say,
wants the game decanonized. The point of lore and storytelling is to give a sense of cohesion to the world and make it digestible to the audience so that way they can be invested in the universe. If everything is changed on a whim, it can break the audience's immersion, despite that being an overused word, but it is true. And for the past 15 plus years now, Bethesda has constantly changed and ruined the lore and consistency of Fallout to whatever they want, whenever they want, and it's both insulting to the audience who invested their time, also to the original creators who made the world to begin with, and the work has been routinely bastardized multiple times over now, and this show is certainly a contributor to that. If you don't believe me, allow me to provide a few examples of Bethesda doing just that. Fallout 4, someone on Twitter was asking why Jet, a drug that was developed shortly before Fallout 2 in California by his kid named Myron, is on the east coast of the US, in Boston no less, in locations where it can only exist pre-war, which is impossible for what I just described. Pete Hines, the vice president of Bethesda at the time, said he's not interested in discussing how realistic things are in an alternative universe post-apocalypse game, with talking mutants and ghouls.
This is a film about space wizards intended for children.
Look, here's the thing.
Fine. Listen,
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
Realism wasn't what was discussed. It was the breaking of lore that was a clear-cut established in 2, which Myron himself goes into great detail on.
Oh man, did we try. So, we figured our best bet was shrooms. You can grow 'em if you use plenty of Brahmin shit as fertilizer. Plus, hallucinogens have low overhead, so I started experimenting with derivatives of lysergic acid diethylamide and psilocybin. Still, I really wanted to whip up a hard hitter that didn't rely on veggie extracts. Man, was I an idiot, because the answer turned out to be the extracts, or more precisely, what they were growing in. You see, old Jesus Mordino wanted something that the Redding miners would get addicted to fast and make them work harder. So I said, no prob, right? Well, it wasn't too hard to come up with a good upper. A sample of that pre-war protein extract corrupted and bam, decent amphetamine.
Myron died less than a year after the defeat of the Enclave, stabbed by a Jet addict while drinking in the den. His discovery of Jet was quickly forgotten, and now there is no one who remembers his name.
Or in Fallout 76, which takes place only 25 years after war happens, and the Brotherhood of Steel are on the East Coast in West Virginia. This doesn't make sense because there is no way the original founders who are still in charge at this time wouldn't allow this since they're isolationists all the way in California at the time. And they said before that they're not beholden to something that was written 20 years ago, even their own franchises such as the Elder Scrolls. These two examples are just a mere taste of the amount of damage Bethesda has done to the lore in their own games. Before I get the inevitable whataboutism of Interplay, Black Isle, or Obsidian having retcons or inconsistencies in their games, such as 2, New Vegas, Tactics, or Brotherhood of Steel, either that means they're problems too, or there's context as to why they're not problems, or at the very least why they're nowhere near as bad as Bethesda's retcons. Two wrongs doesn't make a right. And at least in the case of Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel, those aren't canon anymore, which is honestly a good thing, and I have to give Todd Howard credit for having foresight to bleed those out of the canon, especially with the Middle Coast Brotherhood being way too powerful to account for, so bravo Todd. Just too bad you didn't have enough foresight for anything else you've made or were a consultant for. I'll be addressing some of those from 2 New Vegas, one in particular in the later section, so sit tight for that one. The whole point about that tangent is to demonstrate that Bethesda has either no care or knowledge of the lore, or in all honesty, is both of those combined. But the important thing is, they've really screwed up the consistency of the series way too many times now, which is the primary reason why I had my concerns of the show being canon, because I knew it would affect how the showrunners perceive the lore of the series, and thus it would affect the show as a whole. Bringing me to this video. I've seen far too many people attempt to defend the show, especially on the lore, and it's one of my reasons for critiquing it back when it first came out, only for that to not go over very well. Honestly, I don't care if that video or this one aren't well received, because that's not the point. The point is to make others aware of the true issues the show has, particularly on the lore standpoint. This won't be an overall critique of the show as a whole, since there are several others who have done that pretty well, but I'll include some of those as a bit of icing on the cake. As I said, if you like this show, good for you. But simply saying the show is fun or that you enjoyed it is not a defense, and I can easily counter that by saying that a friend of mine who doesn't know Fallout at all watched the first 2 episodes and found them boring, so the fun defense can very easily be turned against you. And I'll have suggestions for what the show could have done during the last segment of the video if you're curious on that. Wow, that was a long intro, and I haven't even truly started yet. So without wasting more of your time, let's begin and start dissecting what the show does to ruin the lore and legacy of this franchise. To start off, I'll be handling this in sections where I'll be discussing one particular topic and all the issues I can find that relates to it. I figure a simple yet important point to start off, which isn't too heavy, is one of the main races that inhabit this unforgiving world of Fallout. The Ghouls. Being part of the franchise since the first game, Ghouls are people who used to be normal humans, but due to effects of radiation and instead of dying, some people begin to lose their skin and eventually become ghouls that we tend to know. As the series has gone on, there have been several changes that they've undergone throughout the years, such as how sometimes they need food and water to survive, such as the case from the Acropolis in Fallout 1, where if you fail to repair the water pump when you take their water ship from Fallout 12, the entire ghoul community will eventually end up dying as a result. While in Fallout 4, it establishes in a quest, Kid in a Fridge, that they can indeed survive without the need for substance for up to 210 years with no explanation whatsoever, as well as that kids who become ghouls at that age can still age to adults, such as Typhon from Fallout 2, the son of Set from Fallout 1, who implies this very process in his dialogue. But there have been some aspects that remain somewhat consistent throughout, such as that ghouls are immune to radiation and are able to survive or even thrive on very toxic and irradiated areas, so that ghouls are capable of turning feral. The process of ghouls who lose their sanity become wild, dangerous monsters who attack anything on sight and basically act like zombies. While the exact reasoning as to why ghouls go feral isn't exactly explained, we do have some underlying patterns that seem to cause it, particularly with the ghouls in question going insane from social isolation and any other lack of socialization, such as entire communities of ghouls going feral in several vaults that have been explored in the series due to being cut off from the rest of the world, which can cause regular people to go insane as well. Just except for ghouls, they end up going one step further. Except in Kid Approach again, but that quest can go suck a dick, since it's awful. So far, these qualities to ghouls have never really been that much of an issue. Well, until this show came along and had to sink what consistency that they had. For starters, let's start with one of the most head-scratching parts, which is when in Episode 7, Thaddeus, the squire who was assigned to Maximus after he supposedly died and decided to take on the identity of his knight Titus, which we're coming back to, believe me. Anyway, when Thaddeus revealed the truth and refuses to cooperate with Max's plan, he gets his foot crushed and escapes after disabling Max's armor. Now, if we just ignore the logistics, how he's able to walk for at least a couple of days by himself without getting an infection or being able to walk at all at that great of a distance, he finds himself with this nut job who's a sous-vole for chickens, and in exchange for a power core, the weirdo gives Max this drug to heal himself with, and almost instantly heals his foot. And later when he meets Max and Lucy, he gets penetrated in the neck from a crossbow trap the radio guy sets up to keep out intruders. But instead of dying, he survives with no issue to where he's able to pull the arrow out with no problem. Max proceeds to point this out.
That is... I think you might be a ghoul.
This immediately brings up 2 issues. First, where the hell did this drug come from? How did the weirdo get his hands on it? We've never seen this drug before in the entire series beyond a mention from Hancock that he took a drug that transformed him into a ghoul as well. So it seems as though the show picked this up from Fallout 4 because there's no other example I can find, especially in the classics and New Vegas, that have ever implied that this drug has existed. And even with Fallout 4, I take issues with that because so far it's never been explained, and all other examples of ghouls coming to existence happen from being irradiated. Maybe it's possible in Season 2 that it could be explained, but I'm not holding my breath that it's going to make any sense, because you would think something like this would be far more prevalent in the games if it's been a thing for a while now, but there's barely any mention of it. The second issue to come from this is the ghouls' superpowers that they just apparently have now. I don't think this should have to be said, but here we are. That this Wolverine/Deadpool healing factor bullshit has never been something ghouls have had until now. And Thaddeus isn't even the only example of this, since Cooper Howard in episode 2 managed to take several direct shots during his gunfight in Philly, and he's barely even shaken by them and proceeds to murder anyone that gets in his way. He's also able to sew his finger back on after Lucy bites it off. Where does this come from? I get that ghouls have regeneration around large quantities of radiation, but there's no way that those things are near any source of radiation. They're just able to do this on their own because reasons, I guess. There's also the time in episode 8 when ghouls just seem to have night vision now, because when Cooper takes on a squad of Brotherhood Knights and Squires, he shoots the lights out, and when they're frantically shooting everywhere since they can't see, Cooper not only has a severe case of plot armor where he never ends up getting shot once, which I guess does happen when enemies are so stupid they seem to forget that they have flashlights on their helmets, but he's able to shoot them no issue as if the darkness is no hindrance to him. Some may try to argue they may have took cat's eye in order to see better, but we never see him do this, nor is there anything that implies that he did before that scene, so that's just a case of headcanon and doing the writing for the writers in order to defend it for not giving the audience the necessary information to understand the stakes of the scene, so I'm not accepting that here. Plus, I doubt taking cat's eye work for him, since we see in episode 2 when we get shot by Lucy's trank gun, he's able to take out no noticeable effects whatsoever, implying that he's a very high drug tolerance.
Well, now that is a very small drop in a very, very large bucket of drugs.
Speaking of drugs, as it seems as though it can't go away, we see that ghouls require this yellow elixir, which appears similar to the one that Thaddeus uses, as well as the means of preventing themselves from going feral. This is a rabbit hole in of itself. In the third episode, Cooper has these chests full of these vials. When they get smashed by a gulper, and instead of just shooting it when he just pokes at it with a stick like a moron, and so as a consequence the vials get smashed, which forces to see him and Lucy go on this side quest to go and get some at the start of episode 4, where he finds his friend Roger, who's also lacking vials and is on the verge of going feral, to where Cooper shoots him in the head to put him out of his misery. He takes Lucy to a super duper mart to exchange her for 2 months worth of files, and we see that there's a lot of them, and he collapses in front of the store. All this seems to be implying that ghouls need to take these at least once a day in order to avoid going feral. Much like what I said earlier, where the hell did this come from, and why hasn't this a prevalent thing before? If ghouls need to take these things daily, there should barely be any ghouls that are sane up to this point. Is this a recent development? Because Roger does say he's been having symptoms of it for the past 28 years, but the vials seem to be able to hold him off until now. When Cooper went in his coffin in the pilot episode, has this IV medical bag containing the substance, seemingly as an explanation why he's not going feral in his comatose state. But in no game, even the ones that are the most recent in the timeline, a la Fallout 3, 4, and New Vegas, which are 20 years or less at most before the show in 2296, has this been prevalent at all? How is Billy Peabody able to stay sane for so long? Or D. Domino dead money, which clearly implies that he's been in the villa around the Sierra Madre for the past 200 years? This should be widespread, but it hasn't been until now. Is this only for ghouls in the process of going feral? If so, how is Cooper going through it when he's not really isolated, except when in a comatose state, but going feral then doesn't even make sense? Who developed the drug and when? It either being pre-war or post-war doesn't work, because if it's pre-war, why would they be developing the drugs when the ghouls aren't really a thing yet? And if it's post-war, who's doing this after an apocalypse when there's no infrastructure or people to mass produce and transport it? And are only feral ghouls or those in the stages of becoming feral the only ones who don't have super durability? None of this is elaborated on, but it's vitally important, and it changes the entire status quo for this race, but it's treated as though it's been a normal thing for them for a while when it's never really been that way before. And lastly, but least importantly, in the final episode we see Lucy's mom as a feral after she was killed by the nuke that destroyed Shady Sands by Hank, which we're certainly getting into by the way, and she looks nothing like an actual ghoul from the games. In fact, she looks like a zombie from The Walking Dead rather than the ghouls we've gotten used to in the series. It also begs to question why Lee Moldaver, why her apparent close friend has left her like this from the 13 for 19 years, another important talking point for a later section, but she has never put her out of her misery. This is a terrible existence, and I would think a good friend would hate for her being in this state, just shoot her head and just let her rest in peace, but Moldaver must be a psychopath, which granted she kind of is for impersonating as a Vault 32 resident and killing dozens of innocent people from Vault 33, when she could have just found a better way to get to Hank, but whatever, I guess. I suppose that Rose has to stay like this so Lucy can have her character mode take her out in order to complete her character arc for this season. Usually I prefer character growth to be backed up with a foundation that makes sense, but I guess that works too. So yeah, I've already had quite a bit to say about the Ghouls, and they're not even the biggest problem I have with this show. Not yet, anyway. One is arguably the most iconic element of the Fallout series. Some might say Vault Boy, which is understandable, but I think that many people would consider the power armor to be the most remembered aspect of this franchise. And who could blame them? They look cool and they're really fun to use, especially in the newer games such as 4, with how it actually looks and feels like a walking tank. Well, unfortunately, this show kinda misses the mark when it comes to the armor. Don't get me wrong, I love how the armor looks in this show, especially with it being practical instead of VFX, which I praised back in the previous video. But when it comes to how the armor functions along with its lore, it's really inconsistent and contradictive. To start with some lore, in episode 5 of the show, Lucy tells Maximus that the armor he's using, the T-60, was used during the Battle of Anchorage, Alaska, and were responsible for America liberating the area.
The T-60, right? My army started using these after the Battle of Anchorage. I've seen these in old engineering manuals, but never in real life.
This too is false.
Which, if they had simply done more than 5 seconds of research using Fallout 4 as their example, they would know that it was the T-51Bs who were responsible for doing that. Which even Fallout 3 got this right. Even sometimes the loading screens 4 gets this right as well, but not during the opening sequence apparently. Which is why you don't use Possessive Fallout as your baseline for understanding the lore. You people ever wonder why I take issue with that? If you generally don't, then I guess trying to convince you is just a lost cause already. But I think most of my problems with this armor is how it functions, because so much of it is so confusing to say the least. As if this scene couldn't be disastrous enough, when Cooper is taken on the Brotherhood, he goes on his tangent on the flaw the armor has from his experience from back when he was a soldier in the Resource Wars, with the flaw with the welding just under the chest plate.
Well, I know, cause, well, I used to wear one back in the day. There was only one problem with it. There was a flaw in the welding, just below the chest plate. I wonder if they fix that in this new model. I guess not.
He even mentioned this earlier in episode 6.
Looked great. I wore the T-45 when we almost lost the great state of Alaska to the Reds. Those design flaws of yours cost a lot of good men and women their lives. Yeah.
There are so many problems with this. For starters, why would the US not fix this if even their own soldiers are able to point it out? This pretty much makes the whole power armor worthless if it could easily be bypassed with this method, defeating the whole purpose of them. And presumably Cooper's referring to either the T-45s or the T-51Bs. If so, why has this not been ironed out with the T-60s, which is among the most advanced power armor in the series up to this point? And how come none of the Brotherhood have ever managed to discover this despite them using it for over 200 years? Did they never manage to figure this out despite all the time they battling Raiders, Ghouls, Super Mutants, the NCR, and the Enclave? I'm just simply not buying that because this relies on everyone in the Brotherhood being so oblivious and stupid that the generations upon generations of them have never been able to fix this, even though they have enough resources and scientific minds to repair this issue. Plus, this retroactively makes Cooper look like an idiot for wasting dozens of bullets on Max instead of killing him when he knows how to, damaging Cooper's intelligence as well as giving Max a boatload of plot armor. Don't say that Cooper was toying with them because he's trying to collect his bounty on Wilczek. Wasting tons of bullets isn't the smartest idea in a post-apocalypse where resources are incredibly valuable. Heading back to the episode 8 scene, as I alluded to earlier, they don't use flashlights even though it's been well established that they have those. So the Brotherhood being consistently stupid is just a running theme of the show, I guess. Wow, holy crap, this thing is so bad. Another exploitable design flaw is when in episode 2 in the Philly Brawl, Cooper uses a knife on one of the tubes on the armor's helmet, which causes it to go awire, and Maximus loses control of it. If this thing's so easy to damage from just a knife, and we're given no indication that it's made out of some type of special material, this raises another flaw that's easy to capitalize on to essentially win any fight against those with the armor on. Never in the prior games have they been drawn attention to the tubes being exploitable, now that we know that they are, so it alters the stakes of every battle they've been in until now. The durability of armor itself is also an issue. From what I've been able to gather in the lore, the T-51B is able to survive a tank shot if what I've heard is correct. And even if it isn't, it's pretty well established that power armor is incredibly durable to the point of almost any type of form of attack. Yeah, in this show it fluctuates depending on what the plot requires. The second episode, a Yao Guai attacks Max and Titus and essentially bullies Titus and is responsible for him dying. Look, I get that Yao Guais are tough, but they're not that tough. The power armor allows the user to go toe-to-toe with Death Claws, which are easily worse to contend with than radioactive bears. And all that happens is that the bear is scratching the chest plate, the most defensive part of the armor, and the head is also well protected with its helmet. And during the finale, a nice surprise getting shot with artillery. And so that makes Titus dying here even more bullshit. And so it's still into that way Max can take the suit and pretend to be Titus, back to cost of consistency. Speaking of which, that segues into another issue, which is the deep voice modulators that come out of nowhere.
To the Brotherhood of Steel, stand down or be cut down.
This of course contradicts the games, since when anyone spoke with their helmets on, they still sounded like themselves, just with a more electronic pitch.
Sentinel, 5 mutants released from their torment, the rest are keeping their heads down.
Good. Jennings?
Negative.
A new recruit?
Just a stray we picked up. The one that blundered into the uglies over on 42nd.
Welcome.
The only reason I think they added this was to make it believable that Max can disguise himself as Titus, especially when he's with Thad. In episode 5, when he reveals to Thad who he truly is, he shows his face not by taking the helmet off, but by using the newly established facelift the armor just has now. Not sure why that's there, other than just make it more convenient for the actors to show their faces, even with the helmet on. So when Thad turns on him when Max explains himself so poorly, he comes across as suspicious and sinister. Thad takes the key card out and uses it to take the power core out of the armor, which immobilizes Max and renders him completely unable to walk or, more importantly, exit the damn armor. Why would the power armor be designed like this? Like, if someone took the armor core or loses power during battle, is the user just doomed? Fallout 4, when the core lost power, the user could still get out. Some might say that's just gameplay, but I don't see why the armor would be designed to be essentially coffins when they lose power. And if Lucy didn't conveniently show up when she did, since the show has no sense of geography whatsoever, Max would be dead from the rad roaches. The strength is also a problem. We can see that it can easily crush people's limbs and heads, and Max takes the armor for a test drive. He's able to throw large rocks miles away with ease, as well as kicking a rock which destroys half a house. But during the Philly fight, as if that fight couldn't be any more broken, he punches the ghoul, but yet the ghoul doesn't have his organs liquefied or his bones shattered. The same thing also applies to Max when he gets hit in the face in the last episode, by the way. The ghoul is able to knock the armor back with one kick, demonstrating that either ghouls have superpowers now, or that the armor is just weak, and Max somehow has his foot stuck on wood, and he can't get out of it, so the ghoul cuts a tube, which is how he loses. I've seen people try to defend this by saying Max has no official training, so that's why he loses, but training doesn't counter the armor's overall inconsistencies, especially what we see that it's capable of doing just from earlier in the episode, so no, I'm not believing that. The other addition made are the built-in jet thrusters. Not only do they look stupid when they're actually used, as we've seen the jetpacks, they can be added to armor as an extension. And I'm way more willing to believe that the big-ass jetpack can work, since I have a much harder time believing that these tiny thrusters can do the exact same thing. Plus, it's also an impractical design decision, because at least with a jetpack, you can use your hands to wield weapons to shoot from the air, but it's impossible to do with thrusters. Lastly, when Cooper kills one of the knights, he falls off his head with a grenade, walks by itself into the place where the other main characters are, so that way Hank can use it to escape. I don't think it needs to be said that that's not how that works, and it's a massive contrivance to allow Hank to escape and to be the villain in the next season. Lastly, on a more minor point, but I want to highlight it anyway, is that it seems to have gone further into the direction that people don't need training in order to use power armor effectively. We see that with both Max and Hank, but the reason I say I'm not making a bigger deal of this is mainly because it's never really been that consistent. In the originals, the characters don't need training, but in 3 New Vegas they do. But in 4 they went back on that to where even a lawyer with no combat experience can just use it to take down Deathclaw. I'm not going to act like it's the show's fault for its inconsistency, because even the originals have them, and I think it makes more sense that training is required for a piece of military machinery such as power armor, which is why I like how 3 New Vegas added that as a trait necessary to wield them for both practical as well as role-playing reasons. But at the same time, I'm not going to throw a big stink over the power armor in this show for doing this, because it just seems more like a personal preference, I would say. Just don't mistake this for me saying it's a problem similar to what I point out, but this is just more of an observation, that's all. Now that we've discussed the power armor, let's now talk about the main faction that they're associated with, the Brotherhood of Steel. Being part of the franchise since the beginning, and even beyond the front cover of the game itself, the Brotherhood were a division of military led by Roger Maxson, who defected from the military when they learned about the unethical experiments being conducted by the government with the FEV virus in Mariposa military base. Before they could expose them, the world ended with nuclear hellfire on October 23rd of 2077. So for decades, they poured themselves in their bunker with their families, branding themselves as the faction we all know of, with roles in the ranks of old, from scribes to paladins to elders. They are dedicated to affording technology to prevent another disaster like the Great War. In the event of Fallout 1, the Vault Dwellers seek them for help against the threat of the super mutant invasion brewing inside the Mariposa military base. They succeeded and destroyed their plans and fought them to keep anywhere else from falling to them. 80 years later in Fallout 2, the faction has been on a steep decline. The constant isolationism has caused their numbers to stagnate, and the faction was losing power and relevance in the region, especially compared to the power of the Enclave looming over the horizon. In New Vegas, they're at the worst point they've ever been in. They've taken heavy losses in their conflict against the NCR, forced them to hide in their bunkers, and few allowed to leave. The faction is dying with constant adherence to their codex created by their ancestors from long ago, with no progress being made. The only way to convince them to change their ways is through the courier work on Faraga Santangelo. With the faction under the leadership of McNamara instead of Horden, it is possible to convince a truce between the Brotherhood and the NCR, where they finally convince to open up to the world, and maybe they might have a chance to hope for a brighter future. Well, that was until Bethesda messed all that up. In Fallout 3, the Brotherhood has a new chapter all the way in DC, where they somehow managed to get all the way to the polar opposite side of the country from California in the capital wasteland. And now they just decide to be nice and shiny armor that protects everyone now, essentially just generic good guys. In 4, Arthur Maxson, the kid in Fallout 3 who grew up to be 45 in just 10 years, reunited the East and West Coast Brotherhood, as well as the Outcast that's also in the East Coast. Now they're just a less evil version of the Enclave who want to kill anything that isn't pure human. Ghouls, super mutant synths, well, except when you have one of them as a companion, that is. And now they just seem to have no interest in collected technology. They just want to nuke the Institute despite having tons of revolutionary technology that can help out their cause and help rebuild the world. And there's some of the crap from 76 I mentioned where they're in West Virginia despite the founders still being in charge, and they send them all the way there after only 25 years after the war. You might be wondering what the exact point of that tangent was. Well, for one, it's to explain the lore of the Brotherhood, since some people only know what's in the show, and second was to demonstrate how consistent yet developed they were in the West Coast games, but aren't in the East Coast ones. Which brings me to this show. Now the Brotherhood have been changed yet again. Now they're basically religious cultists now. And before I get anyone saying that they were always cultists, that's true to a certain degree, but this is an entirely different extreme. Now they brand their squires whenever they are pointing to a knight, among other ritualistic activities. They have clerics as their leaders now, as opposed to the elders, who even have these chants, by the way. Please! They do mention they collect technology, but it's presented as a secondary aspect to them as opposed to being their primary one. I know what some people might say since I got this from someone I know who tried arguing they developed as a faction over the course of the series, but that is not how development works. What I describe in the West Coast is development. They're overall consistent in those games, yet they have a natural change despite the time that passes between the games, and they are what the fans expect them to be from the last time. With the Bethesda games and the show, they just change off screen every single time, no consistent thematic through line. In the originals and New Vegas, they do have a thematic through line of isolationism, and that has led to stagnation, especially by the time of New Vegas. Their isolationism either dooms them or you can convince them to change their ways by doing their questline, and it makes sense as to why they would decide to change if you help them out. On the other side of Fallout, I can't begin to tell you what the through line is. Nothing about them in 3 leads to how they're like in 4, nothing in 4 leads to them how they're like in the show, and keep in mind, 4 takes place only 9 years before the show, somehow the Brotherhood has had the most drastic change out of the entire series. Not only is this cleric Felix now in charge instead of any elder, he claims that the Brotherhood used to conquer and own much of the wasteland.
We once ruled the wasteland.
Are you sure about that? Which, from what I bet you can guess from what I described, is not the case. Never had the Brotherhood been conquerors, nor did they ever take full control of the California wastelands. They were hidden in their bunker, which is obviously not taking control. Sure, they may fight off raiders who are too close, but that doesn't support what Felix says. Speaking of them being conquerors, We see they've taken Philly, and they implied that they've killed most, if not all, the residents.
The locals put up a fight, but so did we.
So now the faction has been character assassinated because they have never done anything like this before to my knowledge, which is such a disservice to what they are. Especially since later in the episode we see them try to open fire on civilians. And where is Arthur Max in all this? Is he dead? If he isn't, then why is he okay with this? If he is alive and knows about this, that would be character assassination because that's not what his morals were in Fallout 4, since he wanted to protect the Commonwealth and his people, and he never had the Brotherhood do something like this in that game. Speaking of 4, we have to talk about the Prydwen. With everything I've been able to gather, this ship is the same one from 4. Even the wiki confirms it. From what I've seen on Captain Kells' dialogue, it seems to imply that this is the only one. I've had someone try to tell me it's not, but we can very clearly see that it has the name Prydwen on the sides. Unless if that's a production error, but even then that's still an issue that can be misleading, which is a problem we're discussing later, believe me. If this is another one, I'm calling BS that the Brotherhood has the resources to build another one, when it's kind of a stretch already, but it's way harder to suspend my disbelief that there's more than one. Because it is likely that this is the only one, then it still raises the question where Maxon is, and what his say-so is, if he's still alive. Now to some other stuff now. They have squires who, instead of being children or just raw recruits, they're now just common soldiers on the front lines and assistants to the knights that expect to be killed by them even for just the most mild reasons. Or even being executed if their knights claims that they failed, something that Tyus haunts Max over before he heals him, so no shit that Max will just allow him to die instead of allowing Tyus to rat him out. They also allowed their knights to just leave their missions just so that they could go kill stuff. Thinking that they just allow anyone to come to knight without any discipline, make me wonder why someone like Tyus would be promoted to the knight to begin with. They seem to lack sex education since Maximus generally just doesn't seem to know how sex works. Or, just play the dialogue.
You wanna have sex?
You mean use my cock?
I don't like where this is going.
Yeah.
I don't know, that weird thing could happen.
What weird thing?
Well, it's just for some guys, not me.
There were so many levels of what the fuckery.
But for some guys, you know, when they make it move,
Hang in there, Squidward. It's all part of the job.
it gets all big and hard like a big pimple and then it pops.
What the fuck? That's like wrong in 8 different ways.
Which makes no sense because the Brotherhood wants their members to marry each other and have more children to join their ranks. Which is why Veronica and Christine were allowed to be together because they obviously couldn't have kids. Plus, in episode 1, we see one guy in Max's barracks jerking off, so that makes it even more nonsensical that Max doesn't know about this stuff when he's literally exposed to it in his daily life. Contradicting lore and world building just to facilitate unfunny humor is unfortunately a common trend with this show. So the Brotherhood, who have already been the most overused and arguably most ruined faction in the franchise, have now been dragged through the mud once again and just further changed for no reason, just to serve the purposes that the showrunners want them to be, rather than naturally getting them from point A to B. We've now gone from one major faction that the show has ruined, but this isn't the last one either. Because next is the faction that the show managed to completely and single-handedly ruin in pretty much just one fell swoop. The New California Republic, or the NCR for short, have always been my favorite faction in the series ever since I played New Vegas for the first time. We see them start off as just a small town known as Shady Sands in Fallout 1. A town that has to rely on some strangers to take care of their scorpions problem, along with a tribe of raiders harassing them to the point they kidnap the chief's daughter. But by rescuing Tandy, the Vault Dweller inspires the town to make alliances with other settlements, binding their resources and manpower together, they form the New California Republic. They attempt to replicate the pre-war America, where democracy is used once again to govern the people in these uncertain times. They grow, thrive, and explore land. By Fallout 2, they even mint their own currency, which is used in the game itself, replacing the ball caps used in the last game, to where the game even makes a joke for a quest where if you give a ghoul some items, it'll give you 10,000 ball caps that are completely worthless now. After Tandy passes away from over 100 years old and ruined the NCR as its main president for over half that time, the government starts to lose its way. Corruption becomes more rampant amongst its politicians and leaders. They overextend themselves, particularly in the Mojave Wasteland, stretching their forces too thin in the area where they are unable to provide sufficient protection from the raiders and other threats. They killed innocent people, such as what they did with the Great Khans in the Massacre of Bear Springs, which was an actual order disguised as a miscommunication. Other characters in New Vegas, such as Caesar and Benny, make compelling arguments as to why they're not worthy rulers of the Mojave Wasteland.
Ain't we covered this? The only thing not bad about them is they ain't Legion. The NCR is the biggest gang of thieves in the Mojave. Only difference is they pass laws to make their crimes legal before they commit them.
Do you want my opinion as a former citizen or future conqueror? Actually, my opinion's the same either way. As a young man, I was taught to venerate President Tandy of Shady Sands, the founding mother of the new California Republic. Did you know her presidency lasted 52 years? And that her father, Aradesh, was the Republic's first president? Does that sound like a democracy to you? Or a hereditary dictatorship? Because the council didn't dare oppose her. She was too popular. She had the people's love. So things ran smoothly, more or less. And as soon as she was gone, as soon as there really could be democracy, what happened then? Ever since losing its queen, the NCR has been weaker, more diffuse. Democracy has been its weakness, not its strength. Greed runs rampant. The government is corrupt, accepting bribes from Brahmin barons and landowners to the detriment of citizens. The NCR is a loose conglomerate of individuals looking out for themselves. It's lost virtue. No one cares about the collective, the greater good. It's not built to last. I'm just hastening the inevitable. Of course, the most powerful my legion has faced. Also the first to which I am ideologically opposed. Until now, every tribe I've conquered has been so backwards and stunted, enslavement has been a gift bestowed upon them. My conquest of the Mojave will be a glorious triumph, marking the transition of the Legion from a basically nomadic tribe to a genuine empire. Just as my namesake campaigned in Gaul before he crossed the Rubicon, so have I campaigned and will cross the Colorado.
But despite their faults, they've also done what good for a wasteland, and for the help of the courier, they can become better, similar to what happens to one of the Fault Dweller in Shady Sands. It's why I personally choose them as my faction to rule a wasteland, because much like any other form of democracy, they can be better and have enough strong people to purge the corruption from their systems. They're the main flagship of the franchise in terms of how the series is about rebuilding, how we can progress as a people, learning from our mistakes from a previous regime, and hope to build a brighter future, even if we're not always perfect. Well, guess what? All the good stuff is gone now. The NCR is gone now. Shady Sands has been destroyed. All because Hank got jealous of his wife for leaving him when he got controlling over her and refused to let her join the surface when she found out that people were thriving in the surface. The entire progression and the whole franchise has been building up for the past 25 years now has been completely undone. Everything that the heroes from 1, 2, and New Vegas has now been made entirely meaningless. Just like how in the sequel trilogy, all the accomplishments of the original trilogy's heroes has been completely undone in just one fell swoop. They're all just losers now who didn't accomplish anything, and now 3 whole games worth of progress has been undone. And much like the New Republic in the Star Wars case, they're only trying to explore how they might have led to their own downfall in any interesting or meaningful way. Instead, they just have the cartoonish evil bad men destroy it all with a bunch of F-off weapons that just completely wipes them out. Nothing about their corruption, greed, or overextending themselves caused them to fall like what happened to the Roman Empire, despite being the most accomplished empire in the history of civilization. Also, like The Force Awakens, the show treats the NCR like they're just one capital, Shady Sands. It completely ignores the fact that they have at least 1 million citizens at the height of its power, which it has up to this point, have territory in multiple states, have other politicians that would certainly be attempting to grab power to rule the faction of Power Vacuum, but no. Just nuking one city, and that's it apparently. Some might say the rest of the NCR is still out there, but that's never addressed at all in the show. In fact, the show itself implies that what we see in the show is all that's left. The NCR is just a bunch of raiders who mercilessly kill innocent Vault Dwellers in the first episode, a bunch of insane cultists in Vault 4 as we see in episode 6, and a bunch of Mad Max rejects and civilians in the finale. and the Griffith Observatory has a sign that says it's the NCR headquarters. The forces at the observatory, including Moldaver, who's clearly portrayed as their leader, dies. The NCR is gone now, disrespected. They've been blasted into oblivion with no interesting or developed way as to how they got there. What throws even more salt into this bullet wound to the heart is that they of course have to contradict tons of lore involving them as well. They've now moved Shady Sands to an entirely new location. Remember when I commented about the Griffith Observatory, which is a real-life location in Los Angeles? Yep, that's right, Shady Sands is in LA now. We see the blast crater the nuke formed when it hit the city when Max and Lucy are there in episode 5, which he was just outside of, but barely survived when he hid in a refrigerator since he was just a kid when it happened. Yep, they really did the kid in the fridge thing again. You guys just love references. And we see for this shot in episode 8 that the blast hole is visible from the observatory, which makes no sense given that in lore, the town should have been the Boneyard, since the Boneyard is rebuilt LA ever since the original game, so they've completely overridden an entire location from the world now. Now I've seen a couple of attempts at counters to this, so let's go through them. First one I've seen is that the entire mod just moved the capital of the Boneyard and renamed it to Shady Sands. That isn't supported by either the show nor New Vegas, because we see a sign in the show that doesn't state that the city used to be the Boneyard. If they wanted that to be clearly indicated, they should have put some text on it saying that it was formerly known as the Boneyard, but now it's Shady Sands. There are signs in real life which do that thing, so I don't see why they could have done this if that's what they were going for. And there's no reason given why would the NCR remove capitals, and do not pull up the chalkboard scene, because we're getting there. In the quest GI Blues in New Vegas, there's one stage of the quest where you can pass the NCR citizenship test, and one of the questions that's asked is, what is the original name of the NCR capital? And two of the answer choices is the two cities I've already mentioned, with Shady Sands being the correct answer. So that implies that they haven't moved to the Boneyard, and not too long after this is when supposedly the city gets nuked, so that defense doesn't work either. The second argument I've seen in defense of this is a whataboutism fallacy. The fact that they managed to screw up the location of the city by nearly 400 miles due to the city just being east of the Mariposa military base, which is just off of San Francisco, is apparently no different than in Fallout 2, where the wiki says that the location is slightly northwest of where it is in the first game. So now you're a hypocrite for saying it's a massive issue with the show, but not in 2, so checkmate. Retcons have always been a problem, even the good games, so Bethesda and Amazon isn't at fault for contradicting everything so heavily. Yeah, let me stop you right there. Just because 2, or New Vegas, or even the other Interplay spin-off games I talked about in the intro have retcons or lore inconsistencies, that doesn't mean Bethesda or Amazon has right to completely change the lore at their whim. Because either I would agree that those retcons either are issues, or as their content as they're not an issue, or nowhere near as bad as most of Bethesda's. In the case of Fallout 2, as I highlighted a second ago, it's slightly off. Only at most a dozen or so miles. Not nearly 400! It's so small, 2's change doesn't heavily impact Fallout 1. That is not the case in the show. By it being so large a difference, it makes the plots of Fallout 1 and 2 impossible now. Something even the wiki agrees with, by the way. Because it overrides a key location from the first game, it also raises the question why the Master of the Super Mutants whose base, the Cathedral, that's in the Boneyard, did nothing about the fact that there were people right for the taking from Fallout 13 and 15, since we have to assume they changed locations too, since the people who went from Shady Sands and eventually the NCR were from Fallout 15. The Master was building his Super Mutant army in 2131, and enough ready for mass production 6 years later in 2137, and the people of Vault 15 didn't leave until 2141. And Master was looking for people in Vaults because they lacked the radiation exposure to allow them to be turned into smart super mutants instead of dumb ones. In the game, they're searching for Vault 13 to turn those people to mutants as well, since they'll eventually find it with or without the Vault Dweller divulging the location. But the Vaults have moved as well. We note that the Master should have absolutely been able to find them since they're just right outside his home now, I guess. So the first game should have never happened if the Master has perception higher than 1. People of those vaults would have been converted and the NCR never forms. And this location change gets even worse when we talk about the vault section of this video. Or the next one, I should say. So I think you should have an idea why Fallout 2 changed its overall nitpick, and why it's anything but in this show. I hope this clarifies things. If it doesn't, I think you're a lost cause at this point. Plus, I would also like to add that the architecture of the city is just wrong as well. From what we see in the show, it looks like completely rebuilt LA. While in the games, the city consists of adobe buildings since the instructions to make those types of buildings are provided in the gex, at least the ones in the west. Take Vault City from Fallout 8 for example. So they couldn't get the look of the city correct. And don't say that they could have just remodeled the city after 2, because in that game, it's been 80 years after the first, and they still use adobe buildings. And they fall about 35 or 40 years later, so I don't see why they would make that change. Now, we get to that scene. I think most of you know what I'm referring to. The single most controversial scene that's come out of the show, but also one of the most defended. In episode 6, while Lucy's in Vault 4, which is largely compiled of survivors of Shady Sands, she walks into a classroom which has a large chalkboard. The board details the history of the NCR and Shady Sands. So far, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, just about everything on the board is correct to my knowledge. But when we get to the last portion of the board is where we have issues. At the end, there's a historical event, the fall of Shady Sands in 2277. After it, there's an arrow pointing to a mushroom cloud, obviously referencing when Hank nukes the place. So, what's the issue here? Well, if what the board says is true, and the fall of the city took place in that year, it means New Vegas is unable to be canon to the rest of the entire series. Because the game takes place in 2281, and to state the obvious, the NCR hasn't fallen yet. In fact, outside of overextending themselves into Mojave, where the campaign isn't going well, the rest of the NCR, especially Shady Sands, is just doing fine at the moment. There is a quest to Vault 22, where a scientist who gives it claims they need the crop growing research in order to prevent mass starvation, but that's made out to be a long-term problem, not a current one. And the NCR has fallen 4 years prior to the game straight up cannot happen. But of course, much like everything else in the show, its defenders have crawled out of the woodwork to defend every single aspect of it from any criticism, so let's dive straight into it. The primary defenses I've seen defense of the board is that the final portion of it isn't saying that the nuke happened in 2277, but rather that the arrow is an indication that it happens later in the timeline. Whenever I've seen people try to defend this, they have to actively ignore how the rest of the board works in order to make this claim. If we take a look at the rest of it, each historical marker has a date on it, a description of what happens next at that point in time, and a line that connects to one point to the next. This isn't the case for here. This is the only part of the board that uses an arrow and the cloud has no date on it. I've seen people claim that the arrow itself is an indication that time's passed, but as I just said a second ago, this is the only time it's used and the rest of the events are connected by lines. If we take a look at some arrows and how they're used on timelines, they have one of two uses. Either they're used after all the events of the timeline as a way to show that there's a future that is going to happen that's just not shown in the chart, or the most important for this conversation, arrows are used to point at historical events, not as a way to indicate passage of time. I'm showing many examples here because that's just how we as humans naturally use timelines. To try to claim otherwise because it's quote-unquote semantics is a foolhardy argument, and the only reason people make this point is just as a method of confirmation bias to match up with that one interview from Todd Howard that the nuke took place after the events of New Vegas, not before. This still doesn't work for its own reasons. First, that contradicts what the show itself establishes in other instances besides the board. In the credits of one episode, it shows a book that is frequently checked out from the library in Shady Sands, the last date being November 2276, just 2 months before 2277, and more importantly, there's this dialogue from Lucy in episode 4.
In the Great Plague of 77, everyone had to quarantine. They couldn't work the farms together. People starved, my mother included.
So this very clearly points to that year being when Shady Sands was nuked because Hank destroyed the city to ensure that Rose wouldn't try to take her children back and to expose Hank for lying about what's going on the surface. The only argument I've heard in defense of this is that maybe Hank waited 4 years to nuke the city. But why on earth would we want to do that? Did he really just simulate a famine, did nothing during that time, and decide to kill Rose years later? Then why during that time did she not go back to retrieve her kids from the help of Moldaver? We know that's possible since Moldaver used her Pip-Boy to open Vault 32, so they can very much do that. It's just very contradictory to me from what we know of the characters that they would just do nothing for 4 years without doing what they would obviously do as soon as possible. Well no, wait, it gets even worse. From the script of the pilot episode that was released and can be checked out, we see that Max is considered to be 19 in the show's script, and he was 6 when he survived the nuke being hit by the refrigerator. Since the show takes place in 2296, that would mean it happened 13 years prior in 2283. I know someone might be saying that proves that it takes place after New Vegas, that makes the other side of things even worse. Instead of Hank and Rose waiting 4 years to do what they would obviously do, they waited for 6! Hank spent 6 years doing nothing to tie a loose end that could easily expose him to his kids and the vault for being a liar about the surface, as well as Rose spending 6 years doing nothing to get her kids back from someone who isn't trustworthy. There is no defending this, and I haven't heard anyone give a single good reason, not even just a bad reason, no reason at all. This is a catch-22 situation. Either the retcon so massive and the entire game is stripped from the canon entirely, or the characters are just idiots who did nothing for no discernible reason. There is no fixing this.
Not me, but close enough. Enclave Emily jump scare. Hey, what is up, guys? My name is Enclave Emily, and today I'm going to talk to you about this fucking chalkboard scene. The chalkboard scene needs no introduction. We've all seen it, we've all seen people talk about it as if they know, and we've all been accused of lacking media literacy. The only thing we're lacking is actually ibuprofen to deal with these fucking people. Let me explain. This chalkboard scene, obviously edited in post-production, just look at that arrow over there, has been used by both critics and defenders of the show to justify why it doesn't actually retcon the lore or why it retcons the lore. Quite unnecessarily so, because honestly anyone who watched the rest of the show would know that the answer is yes, it does. So to aid the already overworked skids in explaining how it retcons the lore, let me just, get to it. First of all, and I can't believe I am making a YouTube segment for somebody else where I have to explain this, but this is how charts work, right? Chronological charts that have images will typically have those images be associated with the year. When you do not date something in the conclusion of a graph, that being the end of it, that means that it's either something that might happen in the future that you're intending to have happen, or again, in the event that it isn't dated, then it just means that there didn't need to be a date. Forward arrow or not. Now, I don't think I need the best degree in media literacy to tell you that the NCR remnants probably weren't predicting nukes on their city in chalkboards in Vault 4, of course. So, even with all the rest of the context from the show removed, we can conclude that Shady Sands fell for whatever reason, and then it got nuked within the same year. Let's be honest, the intention was to have it fall because of the nuke. Adding the context of Lucy's age, backstory, the information she was given when she was taken out of the vault, the image of the clipboard in the library in Fallen Shady Sands. Oh, sorry, not Shady Sands, where it ends in 2276. And the fact that Todd Howard lies out the ass to cover the asses of some of the worst writers in modern entertainment leads us to this exact conclusion. But in case you don't know the context of the story, it basically goes like this. Throughout the show, many pieces of backstory are dropped in dialogue scenes, images, billboards, flashbacks, and context, etc., etc. It goes like this. Lucy's mom, Rose, discovers that there is civilization on the surface, but needs to escape the vault because she realizes that they don't want her to leave the vault, so she takes her kids to escape all of that bullshit. Hank, now overseer and spoiler alert connected to Vault Tech, realizes that he needs to come up with an excuse that allows him to go out and search for his children and to explain why people are missing. So, in line with Vault Tech MO, that is repeatedly shown in the show, Hank engineers a crisis, namely the Great Plague of 77, which gives him an excuse to quarantine everybody while he goes out to look, and goes out into the wasteland. He finds Lucy and Rose, kidnaps Lucy, who is still too young to realize what's going on, nukes Shady Sands, and goes back into the vault. As he goes back into the vault, he realizes that he now has two problems. One, Rose is presumably dead. So, given that he engineered a fake plague, he can just say that, due to the lack of food, Rose died. Secondly, he needs to explain to Lucy why they're back in the vault, and to convince her that vault life is all that exists, he says to Lucy, who is still too young to understand what's happening, that the sun that she saw while outside the vault is actually just the vault projector. Incidentally, something that Lucy herself does not realize until the end of episode 8. A lie, that is. She doesn't realize that it's a lie. This is all taken from various bits of context, again, like I just said, from the show. If you want to know more about that, keep watching Skids' video as he goes through the show, or go to my review. You cannot contest this sequence of events, because if you do, there's a lot of things you have to explain. First, if all of this happened after the fall of Shady Sands, then why are the flashbacks showing Shady Sands in perfect condition? If all of this happened after the fall of Shady Sands, then Lucy would not be too young to be tricked the way she was. So how was it that Hank was able to convince her of this? If this sequence of events happened in 2277 and Hank just nuked Shady Sands later, well, why? why. The NCR has an army, and even after the collapse of this republic, it still has a fighting force capable of challenging the Brotherhood of Steel. Hank wants to protect the secret that there is life on the outside as much as possible. As such, he has an active motive to prevent this secret from being discovered by the Vault Dwellers. Why would Rose McClane, Lucy's mom, wait 3, 4, 5, 6 years before going to get her daughter who was kidnapped? Why would Hank wait 3, 4, 5, 6 years before deciding to nuke the settlement? You could say that Hank struck a deal with Rose to take the kid back, but then you'd have to explain why he decided to go back and nuke it anyway, how he got the excuse to go back up, and where he even got the nuke from. No, this chalkboard scene shows that basically the intent was to retcon Fallout New Vegas because 2277 is the date of the first Battle of Hoover Dam, completely ignoring the fact that they retconned the LA Boneyard, another city in the NCR, and the fact that they moved Shady Sands, and the fact that they said that Shady Sands in LA is the first capital of the NCR, because that's not a retcon, I promise. Every single date in that chalkboard scene is correct, from the founding of the NCR to everything else that happens in it. So if Shady Sands, the capital of the NCR, was nuked in 2277, why is it that there is absolutely no word of it in Fallout New Vegas? Their first capital getting nuked to the point where there is no NCR left anywhere would mean that the reinforcements that were meant to be sent to the Mojave during the first Battle of Hoover Dam, you know, not arriving is impossible in the first place because, you know, the fucking capital got nuked. And there are countless people from the NCR that are in the Mojave Desert in Fallout New Vegas that absolutely do not mention any such thing happening. I mean, for fuck's sake, there's people from the NCR who even make references to Shady Sands and it being fine, although filled with corruption. And they even mention Shady Sands as the capital, not the first capital or the second capital or anything of the sort. Another defense that people come up with in relation to this chalkboard scene is that fall doesn't mean fall, because fall of the Roman Empire happened way before 476, even though, no, that's not how that works, to defend soullessly their corporate master who keeps lying to them, such as by selling them power armor helmets that grow mold and risk killing you. Or, you know, 16 times the detail, you already know it. That cope doesn't work because, for one, fall means fall, and when we refer to the fall of Rome, we refer to the fall of the capital of the Roman Empire, Ravenna, in 476 AD, and any other references to any other points in time are just parts of the decline. Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, fell in 1453, yet I don't hear anybody saying that Constantinople fell in 900 AD. Because if we accept that argument, that fall doesn't mean fall, then that's what we have to roll with. If we accept that argument, then Berlin in World War II actually fell in 1941 when they decided to invade the Soviet Union. If we accept that cope, then Beijing actually fell in 1910 and not in 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War, because that's when the decline happened. You see how absolutely fucking stupid this is when you put it in context? That's the problem with the Fallout show. It's already bad as it is, but it's even worse in context, and the cope surrounding it to try to defend it just further highlights the absolute stupidity of the show and how badly it's trying to retcon New Vegas, and how absolutely baffling the backtracking is now that they realize the implications of it. If you like this show, then you like this show and you had fun with it, but if you try to defend it on a fundamental level, then I'm sorry, I'm just not taking you seriously. Anyway, I've taken up enough time in this video. Back to you, Skids.
I've said this before in my Batman v Superman video, and I'll say this again. Stop using interviews from the creators to defend a piece of media, because oftentimes it only makes that thing worse. Just like how Zack Snyder said in his Justice League that the nonsensical reason as to why Darkseid forgot Earth, and how in BVS, Superman didn't kill the guy that he rammed 20 walls through. Plus, that's an admission that the piece of media fails to provide the accurate information to the audience in a clear and discernible manner. They had just put a date as 2283 on the chalkboard, as well as Shank's date of the simulated famine that Lucy provides to that day as well. Any controversy on New Vegas' canonicity wouldn't be a question. This is absolutely pathetic. The same show that people claim is one of, if not the best video game adaptation ever made, just as good if not better than Arcane or Cyberpunk Edge Runners, can't even provide basic details correctly or stay somewhat consistent with lore, yet people claim it needed to be canon in order for it to be good or feel like Fallout. Well, let's just say that's not boding well so far. That'll be it for today. I still have much left to talk about because it's about to get worse from here, and I've already had much to say so far, so I think I'll be cutting this into 2-part, so it'll be easier for me to produce these videos, and so people wouldn't complain that one big video is too long, so they can watch it in a way that's more digestible to them, I guess. That's all for now. I'll get working on part 2 as soon as possible, since I have everything I think I need for that. This is Skids, signing off.